I screwed up a bit. So, in working on the Lemon Russ tank, or the Lemon Russ as it's more colloquially known to these orcs, I screwed up a bit in the painting process and the filming of this whole entire project. And to avoid going on a long tangent, this is all a learning experiment for me. I'm new back in the hobby. There weren't tutorials and stuff for like Zenithal priming and dry brushing and stuff that I was privy to when I was a young kid, like over a decade ago, originally playing Ultra Smurfs. So please bear with me. I'm not an expert by any means. I am still learning. I am still trying to get better. I want to do fun ideas and I want to try things. And so this was something that I wanted to try. Hopefully you will still enjoy the process and understand where I'm coming from as I go through. But a lot of the footage had to get cut because I was painting on my lap out of view of the camera, and I've learned since then. Moving on, hopefully you enjoy the video. To start off, the tank is built from multiple pieces. Primary part is, of course, a Games Workshop Lehman Russ tank for the Imperial Guard or the Astra Militarum, but, of course, this pun of a tank needs some lemony bits, and so to make it into a Lemon Russ, I decided to head on over to Amazon and find some cheap fake lemons. I wound up finding this little batch, about $16, with differing shapes of fake lemons intended for kitchen fake decorations. Instead of using them for some really tacky looking design, instead they'll be making up the base of my looted Lemon Rust tank for my orc army. The lemons that I arrived were a variety of circular wheels-like slices, which I of course used for the wheels, some chunks that acted like a ramp, which I put over the side turrets, and a good bunch of full-on fake lemons, made of styrofoam. I'm not exactly sure, but it was annoying and certainly a bit of a mess when I had to cut it in half and then carve out enough for it to go over the top of the tank turret. For a while I thought I was going to leave the lemon pieces unpainted, but both the thought of having to apply enough blue tack or tape to cover all of it in order to prime it properly, and the fact that they were far too bright and vivid, especially the wheels, made me eventually decide to prime everything and paint from zero. I primed the Lemon Rust black, then applied a Zenithal white over top, and at this point I decided to sort of save my progress a bit by using my airbrush to give everything a quick gloss varnish, mostly because it's the only airbrush varnish I have, and also because metal, even the ethereal orcs, can tend to be a bit shiny. Lemons definitely should shine, for sure, but the point of this was to protect the progress I had done on the base so that I needn't worry about my rather casual and impatient painting style causing me to chip off some of the original priming paint, allowing me to focus on just making progress. After painting it black, the first step I had was to, once again, paint all the lemons yellow. I used a bit of demonic yellow from Army Painter to do this, and this was where I started to get the idea of my first mistakes in part of this project. I have a tendency to sit cross-legged, and my desk is too short for me to slide underneath. So, basically, I wound up painting most of the items off of the screen, out of view, and therefore had a bunch of unusable footage. I've already worked towards rectifying this. I have a newer setup now that I'm going to be able to use, but for this time I'm just going to suck it up and move forward, because otherwise we will never get to any new projects and I will not have more fun. One of the things I wanted to get used to was learning how to use my airbrush for this project, as it would be both a fun challenge and also help speed things up considering the size of the model in the area that I had to cover. But I don't maintain my airbrushes very well, and I learned that in spite of any cleaning attempts I did make, I'd messed up something with the airbrush that I had at the time. If air was going through and the button was held down, it was always spraying. There was no difference between having the trigger pulled back and forward. It was always go, 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 which, to be fair, was very fitting since I was using red paint at the time, and that's a very orky thing for it to do. It still was not optimal for me trying to learn brush control, so I opted to go back to the good old brushes for the time being at this point in the project. Now, while I painted the barrel red with what I did do of the airbrushing, my intent was not to leave the barrel red, as my army's theming has been that I make all of the cannon barrels and all of the other explosive stuff yellow. After all, yellow blows stuff up better. However, I didn't want to have the barrel look like the lemons exactly, as it wouldn't provide any fun contrast to it, I thought, so instead of just demonic yellow, I paired it with a little bit of necrotic flesh to make it a little bit duller and applied it that way. I put this all across the barrel, couple coats, I believe, and still similar to the yellow of the lemons, it definitely did look a bit more distinct from it, and I liked the result. Next, it's time for another mistake that I do wind up remedying later. Most of the time, speed paints do not work well on large armor panels and regions that aren't rich with recesses and detail. This is something I learned through this project and from watching some videos after I had already done this step. This resulted in my slaughter red speed paint coating on the tank looking a bit splotchy, and I'm not exactly thrilled with it, but I leave it be for now at this point. My army's color scheme is red primary and black secondary, fast and hard. Accordingly, I paint the entire upper hull of the tank red, making the underside black. Now, lemons are plants. In this case, though, they may be xenos fungi, I'm not really sure, but the orcs cultivated these lemons for their explodiness and durability. They do, however, still have green stalks, coming both from the stem and all around the edges of the tank to work its way into the mechanical portions, and that should be painted green, I think. So, using jungle green, I painted the vines and stems as such with a couple coats. For the treads, I make them straight gunmetal, using Army Painter's gunmetal color for the entire surface of both of the side panels and for the bolt guns. I decided to glue only bolt guns on because they make the most noise and shoot out the most staka, so of course. At this point, I took a break for a couple days, and I get back to the whole entire project, this time putting another coat of jungle green over the roots and stems. This is a very thin color, and I only did one before. I also, on a whim, bought a new airbrush on clearance from a nearby store of mine while I was replenishing some superglue supply. I decided to give it a go again. I do another layer of yellow, mostly as a test, but then realized that this was a bad test because basically all the base coating for the yellow was done, and it didn't really show very well when I was adding new layers on. So, I spray a bunch everywhere, wonder what I'm doing, and then get interrupted by Ella. It's Ella break time! After petting the imp for a little bit off camera, I move on to a new red coat using the airbrush. The intent? To recoat the splotchy paint with the darker, more even, chaotic red air paint, and to test my untrained airbrush control. I'm honestly surprised with what I manage and how little I manage to spray onto other unintended targets, and the new coat winds up looking better on the flat panels. However, it's not done. Problem is, I can't show you much of the process because of my atrocious camera work, so you just have to tell you. I took some pure red paint with a brush and dry brushed it over the red hull of the lemon Russ, giving it a very pleasant appearance with the raised surfaces reading a brighter red. I also had finally painted the beams on the sides as well, choosing to make them initially red, and did the same with those. Next was another dry brush to work on the lemons. I mixed demonic yellow with some mummy robes off-white to make a lighter yellow. I then did the same as before, dry brushing it all over the lemony bits specifically. Pretty straightforward. It adds a bit of contrast, but it's pretty subtle and may not show well on the camera here. And this is about where I wound up realizing my footage was bad, and thusly I'll just summarize the last few steps that I made and show you the final product. I painted the barrel again with the and yellow contrast paint, and it made it look orangey and splotchy, which I didn't exactly mind too much because it was varied and it had the underneath layer of red and yellow under it that made it interesting. I repainted the roots and stems a darker green because I didn't like how the lighter green was looking at the moment. I used a bit of square-ended foam from one of my carrying cases to apply a rough checker pattern of black all over the metal side plates. I used an orange dry brush on the red hole and support beams for even lighter color, a straight white dry brush on most of the tank, especially the lemons, dabs of the dry rust effect using foam from Army Painter, and finally, I used some of the do-it-yourself dip wash made by Midwinter Minis, and I sloshed it all over the lemon rust, with excess pulled away using a dry brush. And that's about the end of it for this lovely little guy. I am not 100% happy with how it came out, and maybe down the line I'll come back to it and finish it up. Definitely still needs another coat of varnish that I haven't done yet, but other than that, it is, as far as I'm concerned, done for now. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video in spite of me being an absolute newbie to most of this, and you may consider dropping a subscribe or something. I don't know. Maybe you like the pun of it all and want to see more of my dumb projects in the future. Hopefully the next projects that I have, I'll be able to show you all from go, from assembly, all the green stuff, everything. This one I already happen to have mostly assembled before I started up this channel, so I just had to paint it. But thank you all for watching. Peace. Hopefully you subscribe if you enjoy and want to come back. Have a good one.